Welcome back to the class Computational Neuroscience, Neuronal Dynamics of Cognition. We are working on continuum models, and this is the last part. We will use the bump solution to model head direction cells. So you may remember at the very beginning of this week's lecture series, I asked you to close your eye and turn your head. This was to probe your sense of direction. Now the proposition is that if you take a continuum model and we put it in a regime where we have bump solutions, then we can account for this kind of memory of spatial orientation, spatial memory. So what's the bump solution? Bump formation happens in the absence of any input at an arbitrary location, but the location could be anywhere. It could be here or there or there or over there or here. So now the idea is that we always have this bump, and the location of the bump indicates the current orientation of your head with respect to an imagined north. Now this kind of bump formation is a standard solution if we have strong lateral connectivity. So I talked about head direction. Experiments can be done in a rat brain, and in a rat brain the one important structure is the hippocampus. And if you cut through here, then what we will see is this set of cells. Each dark gray dot is a cell. If we zoom in, we would see certain regions called CA1, CA3, and in these regions there are pyramidal cells, and these pyramidal cells have their soma. You can record with an electrode close to the soma, and then what you see is that while the rat runs around, this one cell from which you record will always respond if the rat is in a certain region of the environment. So this cell has a place field. The way you measure this is now, similar to place cells, there are head direction cells. Head direction cells are in an area close to the hippocampus, for example, entorhinal cortex. And the idea is that what matters is the direction of the head compared to some reference. And for example, this cell here would have a preferred head direction at around 300 or 320 degrees. And again, a little animation. So I have my rat here sitting over there. The rat looks around. If it looks in this direction, there's very little activity. Now it looks in a different direction. The activity increases. And here in this region, close to 300 degrees, there's the strongest activity. Now these head direction cells respond to the head direction, but of course not to absolute north, but for example to a cue or a combination of cues. So in this specific example here, the rat is in a circular arena surrounded by black curtains, and there's, say, a yellow cue card here. And now this cell responds to this one cell corresponds at a certain angle compared to the cue. And this is the preferred head direction. Now I could ask you to close your eyes. I cannot ask a rat to do this. But what I can do is I can shut off the lights, and then unannounced to the rat, I can turn the cue card. Now interestingly, the cell that has been active here is still active when there is no light on, which means this activity is not input driven. This activity is continuing in the absence of inputs, and that suggests it could be a bump of activity spontaneously formed that keeps the memory of this location. And now, if the experimentalist switches on the light with a new cue card location, then it takes some time until the rat reorients itself, and when it reorients, other cells will go on and the previous cells will turn off. So the whole idea is that these head direction cells could represent the direction of the head via a bump of activity at a certain location. And something very similar has been found in the fly brain. So again, there's a circular stimulus region, and the stimulus is given here, and when a stimulus is given here, then the activity in this circular body, ellipsoid body, somewhere in the fly brain, is just a little left to the stimulus. Now if the stimulus is over there, it's over here. So it's again something like 30-degree lifted, shifted to the left. If it's here, it's over there. If it's here, it's over there. So this is calcium imaging. It represents a population activity, and you can really see a bump of activity at different locations that moves around with respect to the stimulus. Now, the stimulus is on the screen, but this bump activity persists in the dark, and this suggests that it's really spontaneous formation of such a bump of activity, such as we have it seen in our field model in the bump regime. So, head direction cells are sensitive to the direction of the head with respect to visual cues, but importantly, they keep their activity if the light is switched off. They exist in rodents and in flies, maybe also in humans, I don't know. And these properties can all be explained by the bump solution in the ring model, in the field model put on a ring. So, let me summarize. We have seen lots of things today. We have looked at field models. We have derived the field models. The field models are models of population activity, and these field models work in a continuum. The continuum can represent the location of the activity in the brain or some abstract variable, such as, for example, a head direction. Now, this continuum model provides understanding for head direction cells. We are working in the regime with activity bumps. More generally, we can think of spatial working memory, where you have to remember where around you, towards the left or to the right, did I see this item. Again, a model on a ring with a bump of activity would do the trick. We can redo this kind of field models in 2 dimensions and account for place cells that would correspond to bumps of activity. Now, but we can also look in the other regime, in the input-driven regime, and this is the regime that's more likely to be relevant for perception, for example, for visual cortical cells. We can account for contrast enhancement and some visual illusions, such as the grid illusion, with a field model in the input-driven regime. We can account for certain receptive field properties with a field model in the input-driven regime. These field models are really widespread. They have been around for several decades. They have been very influential. Many people have worked on these. They have been used on different applications. I just mentioned a subset of these. There are many others. And if you want to learn more, look at the documentation, which is also available online.